I've been given a significant mission in a short period of time, so we're going to have to rely upon some of the screens, but I'm going to go like a bunny through this, have a chance to talk. Can everybody in back here okay? How many people here are CFOs? I just need a hand. Of those of you who are CFOs, how many of you does technology report up to you? So then I'm talking to some people who are very sophisticated in technology and networks. And you understand all that there is, because if you don't, how do you get a return on asset or a return on equity or a return on investment if you've got technology reporting to you? So we'll assume that I can dispense with any background in technology. So what do you call a CFO who is 68 years old, retired, with a Ivy League undergraduate and an MBA from Wharton, who plays a lousy game of golf, who knows that the glass is always half empty, and who knows everything about everything? What do you call that guy? One of my best friends. And he's a life sentence because I've known him since I was in the 5th grade. And we usually have a golf game on either Tuesday or Wednesday, but I told him I couldn't make it. I am speaking to a room full of CFOs. So you can imagine what the conversation was like. Well, what do you know about CFO? Well, what do you have that could be of any interest? You can't even balance a checkbook. When you can't balance it, you change banks. I've seen all those bank statements, all those unused checks. You don't know how to manage a budget. When you asked your ex-wife what her budget was that month, she'd tell you. She didn't know until after she spent your money, and you accepted that. You don't know anything about risk. You've made and lost 2 fortunes. You don't even have a 401k. All you have now is a few shares in a stupid technology company. You're 68 years old, and some of these kids are younger than yours. And so on and so on, to pump me up for this occasion. So, in hindsight, I should have listened to my mother's advice, which don't argue with an idiot. He'll only beat you with experience. But we'd known each other for so long, I felt obligated to respond. So my buddy's a hockey fan, and I asked him what made Gretzky so great. Knowing everything, he said, because no one could skate to the puck like the great one. And I replied, I think you're dead wrong. He skated to where the puck was going to be, and that's what made him great. Now, I firmly believe that half or more of the CEOs of the Fortune 2000 will be gone in the next 3 to 5 years. So I told him, I'm not talking to a room of CFOs. I'm talking to a room of CEOs. So that's a pretty bold statement, so let's see if I can build a case in the next few minutes about why I believe this inflection point that we're experiencing now globally, called the digital revolution, is shifting the power structures even as we speak. And we're sitting in a nice, comfortable, air-conditioned room. But out there, trust me, there is a battle for survival going on. And it's happening in every sector. So what is it as a starting point? Why does the CEO have the corner office? And I'll ask you a pointed question before we get started. Anybody who has never said to themselves or their partners or their family or friends, or thought that you could do the job better than somebody who's been in charge of the company that you worked in, put your hand up. Remember, you never thought that you could do a better job. If you never thought that, put your hand up. So I guess I'm talking to the right people. Because I think many of us thought that. And if you ever thought about that, and if you ever thought you wanted to be a CEO, whether it's for the right reasons or the wrong reasons, to change the world, to be independently wealthy, to give money away, to brag to your grandchildren, now's the time to start thinking about it. Because those sands are shifting beneath all of our feet. And the reason the CEO is where they are, be he male, female, thin, fat, short, or tall, is because they understand the nature of power. And they understand it better than most. And that's why they're in the corner office. I think we can all agree they're not necessarily better looking. They're certainly not more intelligent, but they're getting the big bucks. So what I'd like to talk about is power. And I'd like us to take a look at the map of the world for a moment and ask ourselves, are these major forces connected, or are these isolated incidences in a cosmic vortex of supply and demand, or cause and effect? Overpopulation, global warming, a pandemic around every corner, and we talk about the crisis in healthcare. It's not just here. It's everywhere. When we move to 8 billion people, think of what the demands are on every resource that we have, including healthcare. So when companies come and go overnight, when billionaires are made and lost overnight, how does the unpredictability of these things shape the world? Is this purposeful? Is it destiny? Is it accidental? No. We're seeing an inflection point right now that is one of the most significant in world history, in my opinion. And I've studied this. I've lived 68 years. I've never seen anything like this. I've studied history for 50 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Where the world is changing so quickly, where the speed of light is now the speed of business. So I'm making a disclosure before we go any further. I don't want to have to footnote Josh Ramo. And I hated Chuck when he asked me to do this, because I knew it was going to take me 100 hours, because I had to read 3 of those books that have been collecting dust on my desk, and one was The Seventh Sense, the other was Homo Sapiens, and then I had to reread Kurzweil. For you, I reread Kurzweil on singularity. And what Ramo talks about is a very interesting world. He talks about the need for a seventh sense. Now, some of you may remember Nietzsche. And he talked about a sixth sense when the Industrial Revolution was coming to town. And he said, if the 5 senses won't serve you well, because this is something new. We've never seen this before. Ramo echoes this for the digital transformation that's taking place right now. Where did it get started? Where's it going? And what does it mean to you? And what is the value of these new networks, meta-networks, systems of networks, networks of systems, internets of things? Davos believes that's going to be $100 trillion of new wealth over the next 10 to 15 years. Not new wealth, the replacement of old wealth with new wealth. So take a step back and think about what that means. If there's going to be $100 trillion of new wealth, but the total amount of wealth on the planet remains essentially the same, where is it coming from? It's coming out of somebody's pockets. So we want to talk about the age of networks, not in a vacuum, but in the context of what it really means. This is not about technology, folks. Technology is just a side issue. This is about thousands of years of social evolution. This isn't the first inflection point. It won't be the last inflection point. But I believe it's going to be one of the most existential inflection points, because it's going to mean the death of many of the companies, many of the institutions that we've taken for granted in our adult lifetime. The billions of dollars of infrastructure for the old economy can be rendered worthless overnight. And I believe that's happening as we speak. The one thing for sure that I can point to, whether it's the Ice Age, the Comet, the advent of writing, commerce, the Renaissance, is when an inflection point hits, there is a culling of the herd. Always has happened. When the environment changes dramatically, organisms either adapt and overcome, or they expire. But the one thing that's for sure is the food chain shifts. And the prey become the predators in a number of cases, and the predators become the prey. But the hierarchy changes. And the next 3 to 5 years, this hierarchy is changing for you, around you, and either to you, or you have a keen understanding of how that change affects you, affects your company, affects your family. That's what we're going to try to explore. The reasons there are 2 lions on the hippo is to make a point. And that point is we're entering into an era where cooperation amongst entities, in my view, is going to be far more important than competition. So, how do you survive in an age where the complexity of the networks and the network's impacts on your businesses, on your business partnerships, on your customers is as intense, if not greater, than at any other point in history? There are certain species that do very, very well when the environments change. Homo sapiens happens to be one of them. Wolves happens to be another. Now, some of them operate on certainly different organizational models. I'm not promoting the alpha male, but it does work well for the wolves. John Holland, the scientist, refers to this complexity and changing of networks. He calls these complex adaptive systems that we're talking about on a network basis, containing billions of interacting parts. The billions of interacting parts will become trillions. Think about how can you compete with a network that devours systems, increases its level of data points, not on an hourly basis, minute by minute, second by second. The networks evolve just like an organism and how they respond to a new predator. So how did we get here? I mean, if you buy into the fact that this complex world is producing predators at an alarming rate, how did we get here? How did we get into an environment where Uber can press a button and immediately disintermediate taxi cab companies, limousine companies? How does the network disintermediate everybody who's in the middle? They do it by adding value to the transaction. It's very simple. And we're going to talk about that as it applies to medicine in a minute. But think of the relationship between the person who wants to get from point A to point B and the person who's driving around in a car that's already paid for. What has Uber done? It's simply married supply and demand. Faster, cheaper, better, don't have to pay. It's already paid for. Amount of time that it takes for you to get this mode of transportation increased by 300%. What's not to like? What's not to like? Unless you're a medallion owner or you have a 150-year-old limousine company. And then there's a lot to dislike. So I want you to think of the cloud as a metaphor for many other things that have happened in history. The written word. Sumeria, 4500 BC. Merchants needed a way to communicate. It was all about follow the money. How do you write a contract? How do you know what to trade if you didn't have a mechanism? The Gutenberg Bible. Now we have printing. Could you have had a Martin Luther without the Gutenberg Bible? No. What was the effect of that network? The Pope and the Catholic Church no longer had the only way to communicate with God, because you could print Bibles and you could talk through a different medium. The ideas of the Renaissance, it's not Oz behind a curtain. It's inflection points in history in which individuals made a big difference because they could see the need for an innovation and they went out and fulfilled it. Writing, what does it spawn? What does an inflection point spawn? It spawns more change. Without writing, there wouldn't have been Athens and Rome. They were funded by commerce. What was the impact of that on our culture? The figs from Smyrna were found every place in the world. As the Greeks moved their commerce forward, they moved the cultural attributes that have become Western civilization. Another major inflection point, the Medici family comes together and says, we're bringing light into the darkness. It was just an idea. And out of that idea spawned banking, new kings, new queens, new popes. The idea was big enough it shifted the whole power structure. Oh, double entry accounting. Sometimes these great inflection points have, well, they spew innovation, sometimes with consequences that we don't fully appreciate at the time. And then what happens as we move into the 18th and 19th century, where individuals now displace monarchs in the power structure? The American success spawned revolutions everywhere. Think about it for a second. Without the American Revolution, you would not have had the French Revolution. Without the French Revolution, there wouldn't have been a Napoleon. Because until the individual nature of the French population was in full bloom, where do you recruit your troops? So now he had an unlimited supply of warriors with nationalistic fervor and the redistribution of wealth and power. Remember this guy? He took that notion of individual liberty and moved it to the marketplace. Do you think it's an inflection point when he established a free market theory that in turn spawned the Industrial Revolution by creating global financial growth, political republics, free market, an industrial revolution? That wasn't an accident. That was an inflection point. And without that inflection point, we would not have Henry Ford. Wouldn't have him. We'd still be using bigger buggy whips and faster horses. But if you think of where you are today, put yourself back into history, and this crazy person is adopting assembly line techniques to build an affordable car. And you're one of the 19,000 buggy whip operators. Only 1% saw the future, where they went and they sold their horses, they sold their buggy whips, they sold the harnessing while there was some value. They took the money and they built a gas station. Instead of taking care of the horses, they learned how to take care of a car. They knew there was going to have to be fuel in the car. These were the early adopters. These were the people that saw the effect of the network. And these are people that made billions. Because what happened when mass production occurred? You couldn't give away a horse. You couldn't give away a buggy whip. And all those wonderful real estate sites were bought by the big oil companies. because they didn't see it coming. So let's fast forward for a minute. We started there with our forefather on the far left. Depending upon what your science and religion is, I'm not going to try and foist anything on anyone. I believe my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother was a chimp. And at some point, she had two kids, and one became the grandmother of the chimps, and the other became our grandmother. And so we moved through a series of evolutionary steps from Australopithecines robustus to Zinjanthropus to Neanderthal, where our forefathers systematically eliminated every competitor on the planet. Think about that. Neanderthal had it all over Cro-Magnon. They metabolized faster. They were stronger. They could carry the game back as the Ice Age came. They had a developed larynx. They had a bigger brain. There is no way that should be a Homo sapien at the keyboard, building and developing networks. That should have been a Neanderthal. Problem is they couldn't get out of the cave. They worked in conjugal natal families, and they could not work as a group. They could not specialize. They could not find the best tracker, the best tool maker, the best leader, the person who could set the trap, and then that one very important caveman who was willing to stand in front of a woolly mammoth with a spear. That's why we won. That's why we've been at the top of the food chain through every era that we have. So real quickly, the network effects I'd like to discuss is very quickly, you can see the signs everywhere. The Arab Spring starts with one man, a teenager, and a telephone, and then spreads across the Middle East. Occupy Wall Street spawns 900 other cities into using social media for demonstration. A presidential candidate comes out of left field, and this is why I don't trust experts, okay? Experts will kill you. Experts generally extrapolate the past. The gentleman that was up here before I got here, he knows his stuff. But I will tell you, experts will kill you because they're going to tell you what happened in the past. And that is of no importance. You better knock off your rearview mirror if you think anything that happened yesterday is going to predict what's going to happen tomorrow in your business and in your market segments. Those are two totally different attributes. So Marx said that when the train of history hits those big curves and then takes a sharp turn, the intellectuals fall out first, because the intellectuals are riding in the back of the train. They're looking backwards. And if you know how centrifugal force works, when that train makes a big turn, they're all at the side of the road. No expert saw this coming. The experts, by the way, 10 years ago, were planning to build more tanks, more aircraft carriers, more missiles, at the same time that our opponents were figuring out how to blend into local populations and use the social media to their advantage, so that actually the more of the enemy you killed, the more of the enemy propped up. My view is, if you're going to survive, let alone prosper, in this networked age, you need new language and you need new tools, because the old ones will not get you where you need to be. You can't solve new problems with traditional thinking, and anything you have in your company, from distribution to channel partners to employees to your capital structure to your partners, if it is not built to withstand what's coming, It will crack under the pressure. And the thing that is different about the digital revolution, it will happen fast. The dominoes will fall so fast that if you're not ready for it, if you're not on the offensive, you have no defense. Because the networks will devour you at the speed of light. And you'll turn around overnight and your supply chain will be disrupted. Those suppliers that you count on to get your goods and services to your customers will be gone. Your customer will have changed. And somebody else out there who's using technology better than you do will be faster, better, cheaper. And because technology reports up to you guys, I'm sure I'm not saying anything you haven't already figured out. That you have to be deploying your capital strategically to go on offense, at the same time build a moat around your core business. So let's talk about healthcare. The gentleman that was up here first said that healthcare is one of those two things that are economically vital to the future growth of the company, and I agree. Why? Because it's over 20% of our gross domestic product, and everything is going the wrong way. Quality's going down, cost is going up, and satisfaction is at an all-time low. 900,000 physicians, 5,000 hospitals, 330 million patients. 3 years from now, those 5,000 hospitals will be at the most 200 healthcare systems. Think of that consolidation, 5,000 to 200. We've never seen a consolidation like that in this country that is that violent and is going to have that kind of magnitude impact on all of us, because everybody in this room is in the healthcare business. You're either a patient, you're a member, you're a provider, you are part of an insurance plan. So we're all either customers or suppliers in healthcare, unless is there anybody here who is immune to disease and aging? So the same number of people that didn't think they were smarter than the guys who are running the company. So let's go back. This dramatis personae, this is a network, isn't it? How many people in this room are involved in healthcare in any way, shape, or form? Okay, the studies that I looked at about the people that were here said roughly a third are in insurance-related, provider, or healthcare benefits. So it was somewhat of a plurality. So I thought we'd be able to talk about this from the standpoint of being in it or from the standpoint of getting service from it. This network of people, places, and things that make up healthcare is under an assault like in no time in history. So let's just understand the backdrop. Healthcare was only invented to meet a economic and a social imperative. It didn't just materialize. We've had doctors since medieval times, but as Europe was recognizing the social needs and the national needs of a transportation network, the world started to think, all this brick and mortar, these fixed assets, maybe there's other assets that we ought to protect, like our workforce. So it was not philanthropic. It was, once again, follow the money. Get insurance to protect ourselves from losing the means of production, which are transportation and people. So the very first network started a long time ago. It was a hospital called Baylor, where they came to the conclusion that people need a place to stay now. There has to be a place to give people better care. That moved into the first prepaid insurance plan, Blue Cross Blue Shield, where it really simply became a cash flow provider until the patient was able to pay. And then it morphed in 1930s into the university hospital, where now we're starting to get a complex infrastructure. And then in 1954, a tax exemption for the employer became available for health care. Now think about this. If you're not paying any bills, if you got something for free, you're going to use a lot of it, aren't you? You're going to go to the doctor anytime you want. You don't care about what it costs. There's no way to measure outcome because there's no statistics, there's no standards. You're a consumer, and if somebody's going to give you something for free, you're going to keep riding that pony. And so all those years of Adam Smith sense, common sense, rational markets, blown away because now Big Brother is taking care of it. And he pats the patient on the head and said, don't worry about a thing. We'll take care of everything. To the point when those people aged and they got to be 65, well, what are we going to do now? We've addicted an entire generation of getting free health care. So let's just add a couple more programs onto Social Security. Let's put Medicare and Medicaid, and we'll just keep the gravy train going. Doctors didn't care. They were getting paid based on volume. Patient didn't care. They're getting everything they want for free. That's some gravy train. Nobody wants to mess with that. Except the world changed, and we now found out we're paying twice as much as anybody else in the world for half the outcome. And now the network players, the dramatis personae, the patient, the member, the provider, the insurer, wanted different things. They had different victory conditions. Quality care, increasing market share. If you're an insurance company, now all of a sudden you're under pressure to make money and to arbitrage things like outcome and cost. Well, here's where we are today. An absolute disaster. You look at every metric in healthcare, and for those of you who are running manufacturing or distribution or areas in the economy that has used technology, you know that in the 60s and the 70s, we took 30% of the cost out of our manufacturing sector, right? We brought the cost per unit down, the time to market down, and quality as a percentage of recalls. That fraction went way up. We went from being killed by the Japanese to parity, and now we're getting the benefits now. Can anybody tell me where the equivalent productivity, quality, cost pressures have come from healthcare? No, you can't do that. You can't do that because we're too well trained. The doctor knows a good thing when he sees it. We know a good thing as we see it in the patient, but the employers are now getting killed. And so government steps in again. Now, what's the impact of all this? We've seen this movie before. It's called the Postal Act of 1929. Think about that within the context of the Affordable Care Act. There were 80 airlines, and the Postmaster General had to negotiate with 80 different airlines to give the customer, the voter, what they needed. They wanted to get a piece of mail from Brooklyn to Los Angeles in an affordable way. So what did the government do? It said, look, I can't negotiate with 80 of you. I'm going to pass an act that says only those who can increase their expenditures in technology and capacity, I can just negotiate with you. And then you'll go negotiate with anybody else. In 3 years, the 82 airlines were 3. What were they? Who ran the northern route in the U.S.? They're with us today. Who was it? United. Eastern wasn't here yet. Who ran the middle of the country? Middle America. Who ran middle America? American. And who ran the South? TWA. There were only 3 left. And there's only 3 years. How many hospitals do we have now? 5,000? 3 years from now, we're going to have 200 health systems? Because government has now entered its hand back into the fray. And it's saying, if you can't cut your cost by a minimum of 25%, now think of 25% of $3.5 trillion. If you can't cut your cost and keep your outcomes moving in a higher direction with satisfied patients, we're going to penalize you. Because 60% of all the insurance is being paid by who? The government. So they are doing the same thing today that was done in 1929. So, my friends, that represents 101 new companies in the digital information, business intelligence, advanced analytics market in healthcare. Because one thing is abundantly clear. It's not for debate. Healthcare dominance is going to be those who manage data and turn it into knowledge, turn the knowledge into intelligence, turn the intelligence into decision making, where that 10 minutes between doctor and patient is revolutionized so that the doctor gets all the relevant information that they need before a diagnosis is made. Not just the hospital records, but the family history, the external factors that impact a patient's health, the non-clinical factors, the environmental factors, the social, the economic factors. All of those need to be built into a decision support system so that healthcare, like everybody else, can avoid the costly errors. We kill 400,000 people a year in medical mistakes. More people that have been killed in all the foreign battlefields since Korea. And that happens every year. And when we see a coffin come back from Afghanistan or Iraq with the flag draped over it, our heart pounds. And we think of this poor family and the young man or woman who's died for their country. But we sit around and remotely accept the fact that we're killing 400,000 people a year because we're not using data the way it should be used. So just think about this. What happens when one predator figures it out? What happens if Cleveland Clinic or Mayo or Intermountain or Kaiser Permanente or Baylor or Long Island Jewish or Jefferson or Women in Brigham's develop a technology that gives their physicians a leg up on everyone else in terms of making the right decisions that then in turn create the cascade of care? What happens to the market? Massive changes. And that's why there's 101 new companies in the last 6 months trying to get in here. So let's tie it all together. What have we learned? When you're in an environment that undergoes a radical shift, there's massive changes in power, and only the strong survive. And networks are like organisms. The Ice Age drove people out of the caves. Some of them went, some of them didn't. Those that went, they had the seventh sense. They saw the change that was coming. The dominant species always rise to the top of the food chain. Because our forefathers knew how to cooperate, and when I talk about this, I think of the Japanese keiretsu. They have a much stronger business model in many ways than we do in terms of being able to weather this digital revolution, because much of the innovation comes from other sectors than the ones we practice in. So given the fact that they have a group of companies with very different missions, think about how you can pool your information and pool your technology. Cooperation made us excellent farmers. So we were not able to not only out-hunt the other 6 species that we obsoleted, but we were able to sustain that through farming. So what can we learn? I understand we're going to have a half-hour break after this session. Network with a purpose. Think about your business. Think about the technology. Think about the IQ that you have in IT. Don't wait for your CEO to tell you what to do. You tell them what to do. Because you get smart. Because you developed another sense. Because you can see things now with a clarity and a perspective and a purpose that allows you to defend your company even while you're starting to mount strategic attacks on your competition. But look out into the marketplace and find out who your partners should really be. Tie down your customers. Tie down your suppliers. Bring the alignment together so you're operating as a smooth value chain. In fact, if I were you and I wanted the corner office, I would network as if your life depended on it. Thank you all very much. This was fun. I guess we have a few minutes.
We have some questions, yeah.
Yes. But do I have answers?
We're going to find out in a moment. Is there a risk that technology may cut out the middleman in other industries, particularly dissolution of distributors?
Absolutely. It's happening as we speak. If I was a distributor today, or a channel partner, or a value-added reseller, I would be changing my business model just as fast as I possibly can. Because if you don't understand the relationship between production of goods and services and customer of goods and services, how are you going to survive? How many retailers do we have left that are in the brick and mortar business? A lot of these hospitals that you see are going to be as empty as a lot of the malls are becoming because you're being disintermediated. How long can Federal Express and UPS, I short those stocks. I'm going long on Amazon. I'm going long on Amazon. Their stock's gone from $410 to $950 in under a year. Why? Because the same place you buy it delivers it to you within 24 hours at no charge. How are the big, old economy companies going to survive this kind of radical change? So if I'm a distributor, I'm looking for partners now. I'm moving up the supply chain to the manufacturers that I represent, and I'm moving down the supply chain to the customers I service, and I'm trying to pull these things together, because if I don't, if I'm not part of it, I'm going to be out in left field. It's one man's opinion.
That kind of leads into another question, a related question. Do you associate cooperation to departments within an organization or to separate businesses with complementary goods and services?
Who asked that question? Come on. You have to be here. Oh, online? I'd like to know who they are because I'd like to hire them. Because if you can't get your organization and the internal elements inside your organization on board, how effective are you going to be having an external partner? If your current technology is siloed, if you've got lakes of information in all different places, if you don't have the ability to sweep up your internal institutional data into a cloud environment, into a secure environment where you can manipulate that and then use analytics to go to big data and find contextually relevant answers that bring your cost down and your market share up, you're not going to be around. Promise you, you won't be around. You may be buying time, but if you can't have your company with a clear view and a clear vision and some clear strategies about what being a winner in the digital revolution is all about, you cannot reach out. What you can do is stand back and watch, because you're going to find those prescient manufacturers that you represent and the prescient customers that you represent will start to see it. They'll start to develop a seventh sense. And when they do, you know what you become when they look at you? Margin. Margin savings. Don't put yourself in that position.
Is overpopulation still a threat? My understanding is that this theory has been proved to be unfounded.
Is global warming real or not? Are we running a greater or lower risk of a pandemic by breaking into the gene pool and pulling different viruses and bacteria together? I don't know. I'm not that smart. But I think about what happens if I'm wrong. And so rather than move from Charleston and the shoreline into the North Carolina mountains, I'd rather try and fix it. So if there is global warming, I'm doing something about it other than running away and putting my head in the sand. Denial is not just a river in Egypt. So it only stands to reason if we're going to increase the population from 6 billion to 8 billion, and 80% of that increase is in developing nations. And developing nations already have energy shortages, water shortages, food shortages, a disproportionate amount of political and social unrest. I don't know, it could be me, but I don't see how overpopulation helps the species. I would only look at nature. The wildebeests go across Africa every year. Half of them are gone before they spawn. The slow, those who are not quite as with it, who get into the alligator-infested rivers first, they don't spawn. The species stays pretty strong. So how does overpopulation help us?
Okay, one more. With what we know of the healthcare system today, expect in the future, how can a CFO best position their company?
Now, that is a very good question. I would get out on the cutting edge of predictive analytics as soon as you possibly can. We're way beyond using data mining and warehousing and interoperability as tools because, again, you're looking backwards. You need to find technologies that can work within your existing infrastructure of IT and that can take data and turn it into knowledge and turn the knowledge into intelligence. But you've got to get outside of the silos, you've got to get outside of the walls of your institution, and you've got to be able to get out to big data so you can ingest that relevant information and in turn make better business decisions and better clinical decisions. The people who get there first are going to win in healthcare. There's no question in my mind.
Thank you, Al.
Thank you all.